Senator from Illinois.
Mr. President, let me thank my colleague from Connecticut. He sponsored a filibuster, or at least a long speech last year, I believe it was, and I participated in it, as did many members of our caucus. Both he and Senator Blumenthal bring a special perspective to this issue of gun violence, representing the state of Connecticut and many of the families who lost their first graders. I believe there were first graders who were shot down, 20 of them killed in their classroom. I remember when I heard that story and how those children died and their teachers died, I thought to myself, this must be the moment. This must be the moment that will motivate America to finally do something. If innocent first grade children can be shot down in their classrooms in this fashion. The honest answer is, we've spoken a lot about the issue, but we've done little or nothing to change the circumstances which led to their death. If that were the only case, it would be bad enough. But the Orlando nightclub, I believe 49 were killed there. Some crazed person went there and killed innocent people gathered at that nightclub. And as Senator Murphy has said, when you go through the litany, it is an endless litany of victims of gun violence. And now, last night in Las Vegas, Nevada, the worst gun crime in the history of the United States of America. The worst. Estimates now, I saw as I came to the floor, 58 have died and over 500 seriously injured. I don't know what the ultimate numbers will be, but those numbers in and of themselves are incredible. Mr. President, last night we witnessed what was the worst mass shooting to date in the nation. This gunman, supposedly, at 10 p.m. last night in Las Vegas local time, began firing from a room on the 32nd floor of a hotel down into a crowd of people gathered for a country music festival. He supposedly was holed up in his hotel room with 10 guns and obviously fired hundreds of rounds of ammunition. As I mentioned, 58 people have been reported to have died and over 515 injured. Those are staggering and horrifying numbers. There are literally hundreds of families tonight and communities who have been changed forever by this horrendous crime. Our prayers, obviously, naturally, go out to them in this moment of loss and uncertainty. During and after the shooting, as we expect but should never take for granted, law enforcement and first responders acted like the heroes that they are, working to stop the shooter, securing the scene, helping the victims, saving lives. We are grateful to these first responders who so often are called to run to the sound of gunfire to keep us safe, not to run away. It's unthinkable that this type of shooting tragedy could happen in the United States of America, but I'm sorry to say it's becoming a regular occurrence. This was the worst. But yesterday, October 1st, was also the 2-year anniversary of the mass shooting in Roseburg, Oregon, when a gunman killed 8 students and a professor at a community college. Also this past weekend, at least 33 people were shot in the city of Chicago. At least 4 died. The relentless toll of gun violence never seems to stop. The American Medical Association has declared that gun violence is a public health crisis in America. On an average day, 300 Americans are shot. On an average day, 300 Americans are shot. About a third of them will die from that gunshot. Mass shootings, as Senator Murphy said earlier, have become a daily occurrence. If our critics would say, please don't exploit the event of a mass shooting by speaking on the floor, as Senator Murphy's made clear, then we wouldn't be able to speak any day of the year because they are so common. We can't let this become the new American normal. We can't just shrug our shoulders when we see over 30,000 Americans shot and killed year after year after year. We can't sit back and do nothing while hundreds of our fellow Americans are shot in one night simply because they went out to hear a music concert. Just this last week, I was at a concert in Nashville, Tennessee, at the Ryman, the site of the Grand Ole Opry. 2,000 people had gathered there. They were mainly folks from the Midwest, many of them retired, who love country music, I'm sure as the people in Las Vegas did. And when I heard about what happened in Las Vegas, I thought, well, what if someone had walked into that theater and opened fire? It could have happened. Sadly, it could have happened. What are we going to do about it? Well, certainly there will be outrage at the death. There will be grief over the loss. But then what? And that's what Senator Murphy challenges us to think about. We serve in the United States Senate. We are not just casual observers of this violence. We're supposed to pass laws to make America safer. What will we do because of what happened in Las Vegas last night? That's the question that brings me to the floor this evening. If we have a responsibility to keep our families in America safe, what are we prepared to do? For the gun deaths in Chicago, there are some things which I would do instantly. Background checks. I don't believe you should be able to walk into a gun show and buy a firearm, or more than one, incidentally, and take them out the back door without somebody asking, who are you? Do you have a criminal record? Would you be disqualified from buying these same guns at a licensed gun dealer? Currently, the law is riddled with loopholes, and those loopholes lead to death on the streets of Chicago. And we also have these purchases being made by straw purchasers. In other words, the girlfriend who has no criminal record who walks into the gun shop in the suburbs of Chicago and buys the gun for her boyfriend outside in the car who's going to use it that night to shoot up a rival gang member or some other criminal activity. Those are two very obvious things I would push for instantly. Close the gun show loophole. Make sure that we do something about straw purchasers so that the penalties are serious enough that they'll never do it again. And there's more. This morning I was on a radio show in Chicago, one of the most famous ones, I guess, and listened to a fellow named Steve Cochran celebrating his 1,000th show on the air. And this was a topic that we talked about. And Steve asked me, well, what happens? What can we do? And I said, Steve, we have to rely on people who honor the Second Amendment and believe it's an important part of our Constitution to stand up and lead. I'm talking about members of my family who are hunters and sportsmen. I've been out hunting myself. We have to have people who are concerned about guns for self-defense to stand up and say we have to draw a reasonable line. There is no reasonable line under the Second Amendment which would allow what happened in Las Vegas last night. To think that someone could injure, shoot over 500 people and kill 58. What kind of weaponry did he use? We'll know. We'll find out the details. But it certainly goes beyond any reasonable weapon needed for self-defense, sport, or hunting purposes. Can we not at least appeal to those who honor the Second Amendment to join us in drawing a reasonable line so that combat and military-style weapons that can lead to such carnage are not considered to be normal or acceptable? Decades ago we did when it came to machine guns. Decades ago we said this is a weapon no one should have, period, except for the military and perhaps law enforcement. Can we return to that conversation? We're going to need the leadership from people who believe in the Second Amendment to make it happen. We've seen Democrats and Republicans join together and pass meaningful laws to deal with public health crises like opioid addiction. We have to do the same for this public health crisis. And I'm sorry to report to you that a recent nominee for Surgeon General of the United States was almost denied that opportunity because he was bold enough to say that this is a public health crisis. Gun violence is a public health crisis. It certainly is. There's no single law or policy that would prevent every tragic shooting, as there's no single law or policy that would end heroin overdose. But let's start working together to do something. We can't stop the shootings that have already happened in Las Vegas, in Chicago, in Roseburg, Oregon, and across the nation. We failed to respond in time for those victims and their families. But if we work together, we can stop shootings in the future. That is something we should all strive to do. We must do all that we can to spare families the unimaginable pain that so many in Las Vegas are feeling today in the aftermath of this horrible tragedy. I hope we will. Mr. President, I yield the floor.